Miami. There is no better person to introduce what that summit is all about, except for the person sitting right beside me, Charles here. So we're going to take a few minutes. Everybody's going to share about what they're currently focusing on. You've heard most of them speak already today. What we want to do is sort of understand what their focus is on this year, what they plan to build out. We've heard about the security tokens. We've heard about all the exciting things happening in the space. So Charles, why don't you start off by explaining to us the summit that's going to be happening?
We run a distributed company. We're in about 16 countries and we have over 150 people. And the benefit of running a company like that is that you have a chance to hire basically anyone, anywhere, anytime. The challenge is that you tend to silo because everybody's in different locations, different time zones. So we got in the habit of bringing everybody together once per year. We've done it in Malta, Corfu, and Portugal. But the general public started asking, well, it'd be really cool if we could buy tickets and actually come and watch you guys work and talk to you guys, interact with you. So this is the first time we've done it. So we're bringing everyone together in April in Miami. We're going to have Steve Miller Band playing in CCR, so if you're a music fan. Stephen Wolfram's going to be there if you like Mathematica. So a lot of external speakers, and my entire company is going to be there. There's workshops, there's going to be presentations, a keynote that I'm going to do where we'll talk about Cardano's future and potentially new products. And it's just a great opportunity to meet my entire company in one location. Miami's beautiful that time of year. And if you like alligators, you can go to the Everglades. If you got kids, Disney World's there. It's a nice place.
By the way, I have to note one thing. I think this panel here has by far the coolest shoes. Jane was talking about that before we got on, and this is quite fascinating. I'm not sure what Tom's got on there, but something
I think Charles wore it though.
Yeah, but Charles, I wanted to ask you, what are you currently focusing on? I mean, for your presentation this morning, highlighted some of the things and the benefits of what you build. What are some of the focuses you have this year in particular, and what are you doing in different countries around the world? I know you have projects in Ethiopia and Africa. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so we've been in Africa for a while. We have a 52-country strategy, so we'll be in 25 countries by the end of the year, and probably the entire continent by the end of 2020. But basically what we do are PPPs. So we train people and then we set up public-private infrastructure, and we're trying to modernize most of these governments. We modernize them with blockchain technology. So everything from property and business registration to voting systems to supply chain management across as many verticals as we can find. And once you have blockchain tech, you have digital identities, you have wallets, and then you can link them to permissionless systems like Cardano and Ethereum, and give them then access to credit, insurance, remittances, and these types of things. So it's a slow, methodical march, and it takes quite a bit of time, but it's very meaningful work. You actually get to start from nothing and then eventually build up to something quite significant, and collectively can end up eventually capturing trillions of dollars of value and bringing it into the world economy, and bringing it in a very fair, responsible way to the world economy with the principles of our space.
And Tom over here, our friend Tom from New York, he runs a company called Fundstrat. They provide a flow of information and study and research that some of the top institutions in the world use, and go to him for advisory for it. So Tom, I mean, based on what you've seen in the studies that you've done, especially in the last 2 years, what do you see in the space? How has, I guess, the crypto markets and the information that you've researched, how's the design of new products and new projects coming out changed your view of the space?
Well, I think it's really just reinforcing our view that crypto and digital assets are, it's really sort of replumbing of the financial system in a shift away from centralized entities towards, decentralized trust. So, it's early stages. I think this reminds us a lot of like how wireless developed, or internet, and emerging technologies, but I think the big difference is that, part of this is an education of traditional financial institutions and investors on, value capture is different and where they can find opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Sam, talk to us about Everypedia, and I know you have a number of projects that are happening out there. What are you guys doing right now with the IQ token? How has that helped in the ecosystem that you're building?
Yeah, so I'm the president, co-founder of Everypedia. A lot of you guys probably heard Larry speak today, give the keynote. So we're the decentralized Wikipedia. We're actually one of the largest consumer dApps that's out, and we've just built so much blockchain code, smart contracts, as we've expanded the IQ ecosystem. We've acquired talent and then increased the size of the company so much that we're basically trying to expand to promising areas in the crypto space. And kind of what everyone here is talking about is we see opportunities that basically we want to expand in the consumer dApp space by building good front ends. First for Everpedia, gaining mass adoption there, as well as new opportunities that we're seeing in terms of institutional adoption of crypto. So one of the main projects I'm also working on right now in the company is called Decentral Bank, which brings DLT technology to currency issuing. The central banks to governments that have expressed interest in issuing currency on the blockchain, their actual national currency. And the reason we're actually working on that is the stuff that we've built at Everpedia, the unique experiences and the software that we've built allow us to actually see these opportunities and execute on building these products probably faster than pretty much anyone else in the space right now. So it's a really exciting time for us as we kind of grow quickly and take some of these markets for ourselves.
And Jane, Dr. Jane here actually is a friend, and I can't really have the right words to introduce her because her resume speaks for herself and for itself. Dr. Jane is basically blockchain social development evangelist. There's many, many articles, including on Forbes, that you can read about her. But I'm very curious, Dr. Jane, you know, you've successfully built a soda company. You've seen this space grow from its infancy as well. What are you working on in the social development space as it relates to blockchain?
Look, my belief is that blockchain is going to be most transformative in the social impact space, and I think particularly in emerging economies. So where I've been putting my effort is into working with companies that are doing social impact projects in emerging economies, talking to governments and trying to help governments understand why this is so important for them, particularly in relation to service delivery for the poor and for getting the poor and vulnerable into the global economy, and also speaking to international institutions. So I'm working with projects in India, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia and Nigeria, and really trying to help the global community understand how important and transformative these can be if we can get them to scale, and try to get international organisations to lean in and start getting involved in trying to shape this so that you can get that social transformation.
So when you talk about social transformation, Charles, I know you have staffed and you have placed your resources in some of these countries, like you mentioned earlier. How are you transforming the way they think? How are you transforming and designing the economics based on not just the utilization of cryptocurrencies, but the underlying blockchain infrastructure itself?
These economies aren't necessarily blockchain friendly. They're more victims of globalization, where they're being told that they have to change the way that they do business, or they have to change the way they do business out of economic necessity. So Ethiopia, for example, there's carbon reduction, biodiversity requirements, fair trade requirements, and so forth. And whether they like it or not, if they want to sell products on a global marketplace, if they want to actually be competitive in the coffee industry, they're going to have to change the way that they track and trace the beans flowing through the supply chain, the way that they actually practice agriculture, the way they actually plant the trees, maintain the farms. So the government is in the business of looking for good technology to help them achieve these goals. So the key is just being in the right place, being able to be part of that conversation and being able to run pilots and then demonstrate that the kinds of technology that we work on is going to be very beneficial for them. Furthermore, it's all about a conversation of control. One of the biggest problems in emerging economies is they tend to be the battlefield of empires old and current, where these foreign actors come and they kind of take the resources, they take the value, and they don't leave much behind. So it's created a great degree of suspicion when you show up and say, I have this solution that's going to solve all your problems, this cure for all your ills, just trust me and give me all the control and money and I'll somehow deliver you to the promised land. That was patronizing. A lot of people have died, a lot of problems have occurred from that. So you have to present technology in a way that it can be absorbed from the bottom up and controlled from the bottom up by the locals. So that's part of our strategy. We enter in, we train people, we set up a PPP, we set up an office, the country owns part of it, the locals own part of it, we own part of it, and ultimately the solution is deployed and maintained by local partners and by employees on the ground. So it's a very slow, methodical strategy. It's it's not very exciting from a day-to-day viewpoint. But over an arc of time, you actually can aggregate and build up to something that's quite meaningful. So there is no silver bullet, I'd say, and it just takes patience.
But Dr. Jane, I know that you find this process quite fascinating. You find the methodology to get there quite exciting. So how does that contrast and difference to what Charles has said here in terms of how you guys are building out these processes in these countries? Does it work? Will it work that fast? Will we see this kind of adoption with these emerging frontier technologies this year?
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, I'd love to say yes, and I'd love to make that prediction and be right, but I don't think so, because and maybe Charles, what I'm seeing is you see a great use case in Niger and a great use case in Indonesia and one somewhere else. But the question that I'm really interested in is, how do you connect that up so that you can have some sort of impact at a reasonable scale? First in one country and then in multiple countries. Because, I mean, I think one of the most powerful use cases for blockchain actually is humanitarian emergencies and the 70 million displaced people who are all around the world disconnected from their identities, not in the financial system, maybe receiving money from UNHCR or OMS or someone like that, which the banks, by the way, are reaping, 10% off the top of all of that. And so thinking of ways to be able to give refugees an identity, connect them back with their qualifications and skills. Because one of the most powerful things that I suddenly realised, because we're working with a refugee community in Indonesia, if you're going to pay a people smuggler to take someone from your family to be successful somewhere else, you're going to pick the best, smartest, most educated, likely to succeed person. So in amongst these 70 million people are some amazingly well-qualified and skilled people. And how do we stop looking at them as a problem and see them as a resource that can be deployed in different ways around the world? So I agree with Charles, but I feel an urgency to get people, just stop going, well, that's a really kind of interesting use case and maybe I'll present it at a conference next year, to go, no, let's actually put some effort into seeing how we can take this and have some impact over, a 5 to 7 year period on millions of people.
Yeah, so I totally agree with what Charles was saying, is a lot of it is just being at the right place and seeing what needs to be done, because there's these problems that can actually be solved with good technology right now, and not a lot of people have both the talent and the capacity to execute on building these solutions. So one of the main reasons we're doing the central bank and actually approaching these government entities to consider issuing digital currency on the blockchain and using DLT technology is we do think it will take too long for all of these things to be completely organically done from the ground up. So one of the things, one of the approaches that we're taking is we're going directly to the government. We're going directly to the currency issuing entities with the central bank project, and we're saying, if you actually issue digital currency on chain, it'll solve a lot of these problems much more quickly. And I kind of do agree that without actual direct government use of DLT, it'll be a very slow process. It'll have to be an individuated, this community and this use case. But from the government level, if there's actual currency issuance on blockchain technology, that'll actually revolutionize a lot of services at the very top layer.
But we're seeing large institutions do that already. I mean, how many of you guys have heard of the JP Morgan coin? By a show of hands. There we go, quite a few people. Actually, we have nobody better to talk about the JPM coin today with us than the ex-chief equity strategist at JP Morgan. Tom, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, with relation to what Sam was saying, I mean, how are we going to get people to actually use this kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, I worked at JP Morgan for 15 years. I was disappointed I wasn't part of the pre-sale of the JP Morgan coin. Just kidding. It's a stable currency. I actually, I think on the one hand, JP Morgan coin is a great proof of concept, and it really validates and shows that they've really come around on digital currencies. But because it's a stable coin, it almost feels like it's just village money, right? I mean, every bank can issue their own version of the coin, and some won't be even on the blockchain, right? Because I think Zuho shortly after announced their own digital coin, but that's actually not even a blockchain token. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's I don't think JP Morgan's goal here is is social advancement or change. I think it's really just their chance to put a stamp on blockchain and sort of assert their own agenda. I mean, I think probably very similar to how maybe IBM would have launched their own version of a personal computer just to say they're in the business.
I think that was one of the most validating things to come out in recent months, that this is going to be a thing for banks, and mainly central banks if they quickly adopt it, to actually transfer value and use it as settlement rails. And people building, both the base protocol layer, people at Block 1, people at IOHK, all of these people, they're basically building the next settlement rails for governments to use. Now there's got to be like a group of people that basically approach these governments and build some understanding, right? They're the economists, they're the people who run the actual economy and monetary policy, but they don't know the bleeding edge technology. And so that's kind of where I see a lot of the blockchain entrepreneurs, and honestly the Decentral Bank project fit in exactly by bridging this kind of gap.
Remember the Microsoft Zoom?
What year was that? I mean, I just turned 17 yesterday.
And remember when they showed it, and you instantly got this sense of you're doing it wrong? Yeah, it's the exact same thing. I saw the JP Morgan coin, and it's, you guys just don't get this space. You can eat those, you're going to have any of these things work. It's an abomination of a cryptocurrency. It's an abomination of a concept. I mean, first they are the Federal Reserve. They run the whole damn show, them and 5, 6 other entities. And there's absolutely no need or utility behind what they've created. It's just a proof of concept for the sake of being a proof of concept, to say that they're in the space and they can justify some sort of bizarre executive fantasy. The whole reason we exist is because these guys are criminals. Yeah. They've done horrible things over the last few decades. They've bankrupted the world, and they've excluded 3 billion people from the world financial system as a consequence of their regulations and the systems that they've put into play. And the whole world is living the consequences of their malfeasance and poor decisions. So, as a counter-reaction, the cryptocurrency space exists, and it continues to grow, and it's going to continue to gain relevance, and eventually it'll collide with the legacy system, and we'll have a synthesis which will produce a much better, more fair system for everybody. But I see these things as the last vestiges of a dying industry trying to achieve some form of relevance. And I have very little respect for this type of work. I don't see it as a positive thing, I just see it as the Zoom, as an also-ran product that will be eclipsed by something else. Sorry for being cynical, but the son of a bitch said we were all a scam back in 2017. And I'm never going to forget that.
Tom, you kind of just sit here. Dr. Jane, actually, with the type of products and services that you see being built right now, different conferences, hackathons, etc., you go around the world teaching at, speaking at, are there any products that in this sort of space that will work in these emerging economies? And when it comes to, let's say, issuing reserve currencies or issuing from the central bank, anything that you see will come to light aside from what Charles has just said right now?
Look, I think there's loads in a whole lot of different areas. I talked about humanitarian, medical supply chains, you've got agricultural supply chains, provenance, land registry, all of these things are going to benefit people. But for me, like the big promise, and Charles, I want you to listen because I want you to build this, is around a DAO around some of our global commons problems. So if you think about, I have a vision around creating a distributed autonomous community, for example, around climate change and the environment. We all live on the same planet. If we don't do something about it, we're all going to suffer. It doesn't matter whether you're China or Australia or the US. And I think that blockchain has the potential to connect up people all around the world, to incentivize them, to allow them to participate, irrespective of what their government thinks about this. Because I think this is the promise of being able to create these supranational communities who are all interested in working on one thing. And Charles spoke about this morning, but I'd like to see people working on global commons problems and seeing if we can really create that promise.
Fair enough. And Tom, I mean, I don't want to drag you into this conversation here, you've been at JP Morgan for 15 years. Has this been an idea that they've been working on for a long time? I mean, we I don't want to relate it back to the JP Morgan coin, but this is a topic that we're on. Now, are there any other products or services that they can build on top of this technology that you believe will come to light?
I think it's well known JP Morgan actually has put a lot of resources into blockchain, and they have a large team over there. Amber was there, she left, but now it's Christine and crew, and they've done securitized financial instruments as well. So whether it's securitized bonds, they're doing a lot of testing, and I think it's important. I kind of get what Charles is saying, especially because I think the banking industry does make a lot of money at the expense of people. The average bank customer in total fees, including what they use their credit cards, it's about $800 to $1,000 a year, which means the average person spends 3.5 weeks a year to pay for the right to use the banking system. So it's a big toll. But I just think it's good in the sense that you need to create on-ramps between traditional financial infrastructure and digital assets, and it really, I think, burnishes the reputation of Bitcoin because that's truly decentralized. So I don't think it's bad, but again, I think JP Morgan is really done a lot of work on the blockchain.
And Charles, I think with what Thomas say, these are people that say the banking system takes $800 to $1,000 out of them every year. You're working with
people too who live paycheck to paycheck.
But you're dealing with people that never was exposed to that because they never had identification, they never had banking. So this is something completely new to them.
Right, and this is, I think, a great opportunity for a parallel system to grow, and create real wealth, and eventually force the legacy system to change. You never change anything by going to the people with power and begging them to be more moral and nicer and take a voluntary pay cut. You imagine if somebody came to all the media companies and said, hey, we're going to create this thing called the internet, and it's going to put all the newspapers out of business, but it's better for every consumer. They'd laugh at you and say, absolutely not. Even if such a thing could exist, we're not going to let you do that. But we created it, didn't ask for permission, and woke up one day and the whole industry got completely toppled. And it's the same situation with the financial system. They're intermediaries, they're middlemen of necessity. We don't want them, but we need them to facilitate transactions, to store our money, to make transactions work better. But when new technology comes, you no longer need these middlemen of necessity. So the only way they can survive is if they move to middlemen of desire, meaning they add value to transactions. They make transactions for some reason better for us as consumers. They make us make more money, or they reduce our costs. So that whole business model has to go. It's immoral. It leads to existential problems. Too big to fail. We're now larger than we were in 2008, more consolidated than we were in 2008, much more debt than we had from 2008. Furthermore, they actually tailor regulation in a way to destroy innovation and prevent people from competing. It's the first thing they try to do when our space comes out. Bit license. The reason why it's so hard to get people in the developing world into the conventional financial world is how do you do KYC and AML on a person without a passport or birth certificate? How do you actually go through compliance and de-risk these customers? You can't. So how do you deploy financial infrastructure to them? Legacy infrastructure, you can't. So what I have to do, I have to go to these jurisdictions and find out completely parallel systems, which actually can be better, but it actually isolates the nations because they still can't play with the Western world. So you go to the regulator and say, can we change the regulation? No. And who are the lobbyists preventing you from doing that? The guys at JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and the rest of these places. Because they make a damn fortune from keeping the system the way it is and keeping regulation the way it is. So I don't have a lot of respect, and I don't think the innovation, their blockchain team, they lost their first blockchain team. Juno went and created Cadena. So yeah, they do some stuff, they build some stuff. It's not particularly interesting. There's no DSL for financial products. Digital Asset did that with DML. We did that with Marlowe. We haven't seen anything out of JP Morgan. There's no major consensus innovation. Visa's doing more consensus innovation than these guys. They did rapid chain with Definity, for example. And so, okay, they issued an asset. Well, we were able to do that with the ERC20 token. Come on. It's just another piece of technology for the sake of having a piece of technology. And yes, I suppose it's good to say that we've somehow done something, but at the end of the day, it's a centralized ledger controlled by a centralized company, issues centralized assets, which will always remain in the legacy system. how is that any better than a database?
Yeah, I think the theme here is there's basically a fundamental, disillusionment with the legacy system, especially after the last bailouts, after what Charles was talking about too big to fail, right? And this type of capitalist system, this kind of too big to fail, capitalism without default is kind of like religion without hell. It doesn't make any sense, and so this kind of system doesn't work. There's a fundamental disillusionment with everyone that's participating in the system, except for obviously the people that are making the most money out of this kind of system. And so we're actually pretty aware of that kind of stuff at the central bank, and when we approach governments is, what Charles is right, you can't really kind of beg them and stuff. You have to kind of imagine what it's like to bring transparency into a world that would benefit everyone, but without coming at it from a way that's saying, well, we're trying to take power away from the government and give it back to people. It's a really tricky situation. It's not easy to solve.
Well, how do you speak their language? And this might be something good for you, Sam, and some people in the audience who are working on these projects. Dr. J, maybe you can share some advice. How do you speak to these governments? How do you speak to these people in a way where they understand they can collaborate with you to basically, engage and make that change?
Well, one of the most interesting things is there's a lot of extreme interest and curiosity. We've been approached by the IMF and people at the Federal Reserve actually to discuss this with us. So there is actual genuine interest in this technology and employing this technology in real world use cases. But like Charles was saying, and he's completely right, is one of the main things every institution is very, very reserved about is giving up their institutional control, literally. So it's a really tricky conversation, but the good news is everyone's really interested in at least having the conversation. So that's really promising so far. So people are interacting from both sides of the space. So that's what's really interesting.
Yeah, how do you bring that advice if you wanted to implement a decentralized solution? How do I bring that up? How do I talk to them?
Well, I think there's a few different things at play here, because I think that, if you like, the ecosystem sort of doesn't exist because the tech guys are in their garages and they're going, fuck governments, fuck banks. Well, the government's not going to want to talk to them, are they? Even if they are building these incredible things. The capital's over there, not necessarily deployable to be able to move these things and get them to scale, particularly for social benefit. The governments don't know, aren't educated, and are a bit scared because they think it's crypto anarchy or something. So there's got to be bridges to be able to have the conversations. That's the first thing. The second thing is, talk to them about a problem that they've got that they recognise. Don't go and go, well, you're really corrupt and I'm going to fix it because I'm going to have a blockchain, because that's not going to be popular. But in Papua New Guinea, which is a country that I work in a lot, 85% of the population's unbanked. Less than 30% are registered. That's a problem the government wants to solve. So they are willingly and happily in a conversation about how to solve those problems. So I think you need bridges, and I think you need people who can speak the language of governments in a comfortable way, and then you need to be able to be connected with the ideas and the technology.
Thank you, Dr. Jane. We have time for one question from the audience. Does anybody have a question for any of our panelists here? Front row.
What is about the future of cross-blockchain communication? Because now we have a different blockchain platform. How we can move to borderless, decentralized world, for your opinion? Because there are a different consensus model. Each blockchain provides different decision rights. So how we can move from borderless economic, borderless decentralized system?
Right. So I'll try to be brief because this panel's sitting between you guys and alcohol. So anyway, in terms of interledger communication, you want to either move information or value between different ledgers, and say ledger in an abstract way. So it can be a bank ledger, a cryptocurrency ledger, a permission system. So there are really two questions you have to answer when you move value between ledgers. One is, does the asset exist? So if you're going Litecoin to Bitcoin, is that actual real Litecoin that you're sending from Litecoin to Bitcoin? The other is, if it exists, has it been double spent? How do I know you didn't also send that to Dash or something? Because these are supposedly independent systems. So there's a whole class of protocols we've worked on, like NEPA PALs, and we have an equivalent for proof of stake, that allow you to answer these questions succinctly, which means that you don't have to possess a full copy of the other ledger to validate that. Now there are other classes of protocols, like the interledger protocol that Ripple's been building through the W3C. Lightning can actually be viewed this way, which allow you to also answer these questions, but do so with centralized or federated curation, meaning there's a middleman that lives between the ledger and facilitates the transaction. That can be an atomic cross-chain swap or some injection of information, and they have some degree of trust around them. So it's a game of who do you trust and what guarantees do you want to have in terms of privacy and security for when you want to move value between these ledgers. Within the next few years, standards will mature and the cryptography will mature to a point where we'll have a whole family of protocols, and then eventually it's just pragmatism that will stand out. It's a question of which standard will win out. Bluetooth isn't necessarily the best way of connecting to your headset, but it's the one that won, and that's why all your cell phones support that. So even if you have a better protocol, the reality is the market will decide which protocol is going to go. And there's, within those decisions, going to be a family of options, from non-interactive, completely firewall protocols. So when you're going from Litecoin to Bitcoin, you, the user, do this, but there's no middleman that's required. Protocols that are orders of magnitude more efficient will provide additional features like the injection of external information, but will require some form of centralized curation. And there's a whole family of providers, from Lightning to what Blockstream is doing to what Ripple is doing with Interledger and so forth. And the protocol designer gets to decide which standards they want to support.
There are the global point of trust of this cross-blockchain system there. Yeah.
And you can either do it as a ledger, like Aeon is trying to do, or as a federated network, like what Lightning is trying to do, or as just a single point that facilitates the transaction, or even a smart contract like what Kyber is trying to do. So there's a lot of options that you have, and it just depends on your cost per transaction, the latency of the transaction, the security assumptions you have, and also the underlying privacy. You want other parties to know what you're doing. It also depends on the capabilities of the underlying ledger. Bitcoin is kind of the most primitive. It's blind, deaf, and dumb. So a lot of meta stuff you have to build around it. Ethereum is programmable, as is Cardano and EOS and other ledgers, so you have a lot more power there to actually build that into the base layer and make it work. But it's more expensive because it takes gas to do these types of things. So you may end up having a $50 transaction to move something off chain. It's entirely possible.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Charles. Thank you for the rest of the panelists here. That concludes the conference segment of the Hong Kong Blockchain Week 2019. So thank you all for coming. I hope you all have enjoyed.